supposing truth to be a woman, what is the suspicion not well founded that all philosophers, when they have been dogmatists, have had little understanding of women, that the gruesome earnest, the clumsy importunitude with which they have hitherto been in the habit of approaching truth have been inept and improper means for winning a wench. Certainly she has not let herself be won, and today every kind of dogmatism stands sad and discouraged, if it continues to stand at all. For there are scoffers who assert it has fallen down, that dogmatism lies on the floor, more that dogmatism is at its last gasp. To speak seriously, there are good grounds for hoping that all dogmatism in philosophy, the solemn air of finality it has given itself notwithstanding, may, none the less, have been no more than a noble childishness and tyrannism. And the time is perhaps ever close at hand when it will be grasped in case after case what has been sufficient to furnish the foundation stone for such sublime and unconditional philosophers' edifices as the dogmatists have hitherto been constructing, some popular superstition or another from time immemorial, such as the soul superstition, which, as the subject and ego superstition, has not yet ceased to be mischief even today. Perhaps some play on words, a grammatical seduction, or an audacious generalization, on the basis of every narrow, very personal, very human, all too human facts. Let us hope that dogmatic philosophy was only a promise across millennia, as in still earlier age was astrology in the service of which more labor, money, ingenuity, and patience has perhaps been expended than for any real science hitherto. We owe to it and to its supra-terrestrial claims the grand style of architecture in Asia and Egypt. It seems that in order to inscribe themselves in the hearts of humanity with eternal demands, all great things have first to wander the earth as monstrous and fear-inspiring grotesques. Dogmatic philosophy, the doctrine of Venida in Asia and Platonism in Europe, for example, was a grotesque of this kind. Let us not be ungrateful to it, even though it certainly has to be admitted that the worst, most worrisomely protracted, and most dangerous of all errors hitherto has been a dogmatist error, namely Plato's invention of pure spirit and the good in itself. But now, when that has been overcome, when Europe breathes again after this nightmare, can enjoy at any rate a healthier sleep, whose task is wakefulness itself has intertwined all the strength which has been cultivated by the struggle against this error. To be sure, to speak of spirit and the good as Plato did meant standing truth on her head and denying perspective itself, the basic condition of all life. Indeed, one may ask as a physician, how could such a melody attack this loveliest product of antiquity, Plato? Did the wicked Socrates corrupt him after all? Could Socrates have been a corrupter of youth after all, and have deserved his hemlock? But the truth against Plato, or to express it more plainly, and for the people, the struggle against Christian ecclesiastical pressure for millennia. The Christianity is Platonism for the people, has created in Europe a magnificent tension of the spirit, such as has never existed on earth before. With so tense a bow, one can now shoot for the most distant targets. European man feels this tension at the state of distress. To be sure, and there have already been two grand attempts to relax the bow, once by means of Jesuitism, the second time by means of democratic enlightenment, which latter may in fact, with the aid of freedom of the press and the reading of newspapers, achieve a state of affairs in which the spirit would no longer so easily feel itself to be needed. The Germans invented gunpowder, and credit to them, but they evened the score again when they invented the press. But we who are neither Jesuits, nor Democrats, nor even sufficiently German, we good Europeans, and free, very free spirits, we have it still, the whole need of the spirit, and the whole tension of its bow, and perhaps also the arrow, the task, and, who knows, the targets. Part 1. On the Prejudices of Philosophers. Aphorism 1. The will to truth, which is still going to tempt us to many a hazardous enterprise, that celebrated veracity of which all philosophers have hitherto spoken with reverence. What questions this will to truth has always set before us. What strange, wicked, questionable questions. It is already a long story, yet does it not seem as if it has only just begun? It is any wonder we should at last grow distrustful, lose our patience, turn impatiently away, that this Sphinx should teach us too to ask questions. Who really is it that here questions us? What really is it in us that wants the truth? We did indeed pause for a long time for the question of the origin of this will, until finally we came to a complete halt before an even more fundamental question. We asked after the value of this will. We granted that we want this truth. Why not untruth, uncertainty, even ignorance? The problem of the value of this truth stepped before us, or was it that we stepped before the problem? Which of us is Oedipus here? Which of us the Sphinx? Is it, it seems, a rendezvous of questions and question marks? And would you believe it? It has almost come to seem to us that this problem has never before been posed, that we have, for the first time, fixed our eye on it, to hazard it. For there is a hazard in it, and perhaps there exists no greater hazard. Welcome, everyone. This series is beginning with Beyond Good and Evil from the Friedrich Nietzsche, a misinterpreted, nuanced, and influential person after his time. And to quote Nietzsche himself, nobody becomes who they are till after their death. Paraphrasing. Sometimes it's arduous to remember his entire quotes, but there's one that everybody says and has no background information, nor origin of what he's saying. What does not kill me makes me stronger. Another one is God is dead. Two quotes for two separate books for two separate times. We begin the series with Beyond Good and Evil, the Preface and Aphorism 1 of Part 1, The Prejudices of Philosophers. In the beginning of the preface, one second, I'll drink myself some water. The beginning of the preface, supposing truth to be a woman. Nietzsche has a complex history with women. From the time he was a professor at Basel, he democratically elected the first woman professor or first woman occupant in the University of Basel staff. He was one of multiple people who elected her. We'll slowly see after his time with a woman from a Russian poet and her friend Paul Reed that he alters his views drastically, 180 style, of women in The Joyful Science. But today with Beyond Good and Evil, supposing truth to be a woman, another complex and nuanced view with Nietzsche on truth. He's linking the two, implying that both their nature is naive, playful, and blunt. It will be a continuous pattern with Nietzsche of comparing man and woman relationship and Diamonism with the philosopher truth, tension, connection, and Diamonism. So while the philosopher is seeking truth, the man seeks the woman. And to quote him, they have little understanding of women, these dogmatists. He's labeling the philosophers before him and after him a foresight, which he's terrifically great at. He'll have great foresight that he saw what's happening today, and once we read Søren Kierkegaard, he'll have that same foresight. The dogmatists he's labeling are the rationalists, empiricists, utilitarians, Christians, idealists, religious and spiritual people. He's saying dogmatism as they're clumsy, improper, and while their habitual approach to truth and not seizing or winning this woman, or as he said, the winch. But they continue to fall and come short and blunder every single time and experience a melancholic emotion with a side of discouragement or indignity because they didn't receive truth how they wanted to receive truth. So while comparing the nature of woman and truth is the same how you would compare the philosopher and man. And among his time, man was at the expired and almost expiring age of Romanticism, and Nietzsche's the final and encapsulating romantic. He immensely appreciated and advertised the romantic movement in the early 2000s, in the early 1800s, late 1700s to combat and oppose the democratic enlightenment, as he said in the preface. But once the romanticism in Germany continued to have this overwhelming, flowing, spontaneous energy, enthusiasm, ambition, and young, warm, and free spirit, enter the democratic enlightenment or the scientific enlightenment to oppose dogmatically the systems of religion and the ecclesiastical pressure of the time by saying there's no God in the sky, there's only stars, there's atom, there's elements, there's this, there's that. And while this opposing to the ecclesiastical pressure of Christianity, the dominant religion in Europe, they were dependent on science, everything external, outward, reason, evidence, as if a form of justice, beauty, the truth, and satisfaction, an almost complacent state of arrogance. And while labeling the philosophers before him, namely the idealists and the people among the Enlightenment and scientific revolution, labeling them dogmatists is a proper label. He'll continue to say that this noble childishness with their solemn air and final final judgment of everything is sufficient for the foundation stone of a sublime and unconstitutional edifices of the philosophers that they have before us constructed, and for time immemorial became the popular superstition, namely the soul superstition, the subject ego superstition that continues to be mischief to today. It's a, how would I say this? It's audacious of them to assert everything. While asserting everything, it's a play on words to mesmerize people with bare minimum education of what they're saying. So while these uneducated, illiterate, middle class to lower class people of the time, well, it would be lower class, it would be lower and upper class, the middle class didn't exist. So once the Industrial Revolution came and the introduction of capitalism, the middle class, so I'll include the middle class briefly, but in the Enlightenment, with the lower class were illiterate peasants who were taught basic, as Nietzsche would say, edifices of the theologians, the priests, and the ecclesiastical clergy that were teaching them of this sublime and human, all too human, personal, and narrow information with grammatical seduction to lure them and to allure and induce them selfishly, as they appear selfless, innocent, and appealing, but it was the appetite of a deception, or he'll say later, will to deceit, with the selfish desire for complacency. But it's a form of altruism that they perform to induce and attract everything. And he continues forward that let this be only a promise across millennia, as in an earlier stage with astrology, the scientific revolution, serve as a more labor, money, ingenuity, and patience as perhaps been expended than for any real science before us. For multiple millennia, we were dependent with calendars, time, and dates, events, etc., with the sky. How the educated astrologers and astronomers, or priests, or spiritual individuals who were educated in astrology, we were dependent on their accuracy and information for calendars, dates, months, time, seasonal, and they predicted almost every time the cyclical cycle of Earth from both equinoxes of winter to summer. And that they were using this labor, money, and ingenuity, and a whole lot of patience, I'll say, for this solemn air of real science. To quote, as a super terrestrial claim as a grand style of architecture in Asia and Europe. Including both Asia and Europe, including Asia is a great feature that Nietzsche does. While Asia is influential with money, tea, spices, imports, exports from multiple silk routes. They too practice an astrology from the influence of Egypt, Greece, and everything west of those two countries. So it's great to hear that he's including Asia, but the 180 in the negative portion is this terrestrial, solemn air, sober realist, real science. It was that every expenditure, concentration, and labor that was used was to manipulate everybody with the sublime of superstition, including the soul of this sublime superstition. And sublime meaning something transcendent or beyond physics or the physical body, say metaphysical. And that this foundational stone was unconstitutional and dogmatic in its perspective. Because one, they used all the time, they did, and two, with the material they used, they could manipulate the hierarchy, and the hierarchy can reflect that deceit, conscious or unconscious, conscious included, to the peasants. And they were dependent, the peasants or the lower class were dependent on the hierarchy of every information, and once they received bits, pieces, fragments of information, they'd relay and reciprocate that information to one another. When he's discussing edifices, he's discussing the ideas of the idealist. Say with Kant, his categorical imperative, a thing in itself, etc., etc., etc. Hegel with the dialectic, the triad, his teleological perspective of how history functions, Plato with his morality, metaphysics, and academia, and the foresight of his government style. But with these edifices, why they're dogmatic, why they're sorrowful or sad and discouraged they can't receive the woman, is because with this obsession, they think, with this obsession, it's dispassionate, it's objectifying, it's not enthusiastic, warm, approaching, but assertive, cold, serious, or solemn, childish. And he uses the word noble childishness in the sense that it's great to be philosophical or have truth, or no, seek truth and be dependent on reasons and other edifices. And play on words, be seductive, etc., etc., and adding adding to these edifices is the soul, subject, object, ego, etc., etc., where the division of these words have have different definitions for every philosopher, but it's linearly not linearly but horizontally linear with imitation. What I'm saying is everybody's imitating everybody else in horizontal fashion. Nothing's vertical of character. And that begins the decadence of society once the man is belittled of his nature and masculinity, unused, unknown, and neglected too. And he'll say, "And thus spoke Zarathustra, what is good? Bravery of all kind. Let the little girl say, while smiling, it's all fun and dandy. Whatever is pretty and beautiful." I'm paraphrasing. I don't have the book in front of me now. But the little girl, as he says, loves a valor, vicious, vigorous, strong, mastering warrior, and not a sainthood of knowledge, as the astrologers or Adamus materialists, as he would say later in the work, but we continue to use them, their labor, money, ingenuity, and patience for this science as their god, while the contrary is with the philosophers. They're concentrated on this truth. And it's childish and tyrannical of them if they can grab in time what this truth is, or this will to truth. And he continues saying, if it continues to stand at all, for there are scoffers who assert it has fallen down, that dogmatism lies on the floor, more, that dogmatism is at its last gasp. It's discussing events in history where dogmatism is suffocating to the degree where we re-enter the pre-Socratic, pre-reason, or morality / philosophy era, where reason, morality, and Socrates was unheard of. One example he continues using is the Renaissance, and that the Renaissance was a overflowing vitality state of humanity again, where they entered the strong, noble mentality once again. And we'll be defining what Nietzsche is saying of strong and noble mentality in both this work and in the Genealogy of Morals after this work. But I digress. So with these edifices, superstition, play on words, the seduction, and astrology, and the promise across millennia of this dogmatic philosophy that suffocates and dies. This ties with philosophers saying that knowledge and truth is the father of everything, and how objectifying something impersonal is the true beauty, justice, love, wisdom, knowledge, and experience of life, and that the phenomenon in the artist is transitory or impermanent than what's not versus what's permanent and that's on the other side of the rainbow, or on the other side of life. And what he's saying in the preface is, one, the foundation of this work, and two, in between the lines, he's realizing a physiological view of a person's, including the philosopher's, obsession with truth's reality from a psychological prejudice, confession, and memoir of the person to that physiological reality and how they see it. And he says on the next page that it seems that in order to inscribe themselves in the hearts of humanity with eternal demands, all things have first to wander the earth as monstrous and fear-inspiring grotesques. And he's saying that before the next page, as it's this eternal duty and self-sacrifice that is impressed in the hearts of humans or society, that once it becomes an unconscious instinct and action, and they're rarely conscious of the action itself, that it becomes a monstrous and fear-inspiring, gruesome picture to those who can see through the black and white, aka this dogmatic philosophy. And he includes the Vedanta, the doctrine of Vedanta in Asia, as its equivalent to Plato in Europe, or Socrates, Aristotle, everything after Socrates and Heraclitus. That'll be a crucial name to hear later in the series, Heraclitus and how he plays with Nietzsche and vice versa. Then he says, just wait 1 second. Don't be so ungrateful. Though it may be certain that this has been admitted as the worst as it could possibly be, that this tiresome and most dangerous of all errors is that dogmatist error. Namely, that Plato's creation of a pure spirit and the good in itself. You've plausibly heard. No, I'm not saying plausibly. I'll say you've heard of pure spirit somewhere and a good in itself. That good in itself and pure spirit is from religion, or and outside of religious people, where they continue spewing the same cliche statements or edifices to other people. Be good, stay good, do this, do that. Doesn't it truly sound commanding, as a commanding philosophy? To me, yes, but I'm excluding myself for now. So once Plato creates this pure spirit and good in itself, pure spirit, say the idea of a ultimate and transcendental spirit beyond humans, thus the introduction of a duality of the mind-body separation that Spinoza denounces millennia after Plato. This pure spirit translates to religion, to how they categorize spirit as a burden or entity inside of human bodies. One example, the soul, and it's combating to leave, and once you die, the spirit roams free, but it's judged accordingly to the punishment, torment, vice, and wrongdoing, air quoting, wrongdoing of its actions inside the body. But now, when it has been overcome, when Europe, or society, the mentality of the world now, breathes again after this nightmare, and can enjoy at any rate a healthier sleep. Sleep is a neglected topic, and Nietzsche, he discusses sleep in this book, Zarathustra. Yes, I'm tying one book that I haven't read on this channel yet. I'm tying the two because Beyond Good and Evil is a simplified version of Zarathustra times 100, but at the same time, times 100 still a complex work. Everything after Zarathustra is simplifying what Zarathustra was saying, or what Nietzsche was saying inside this gargantuan poem of a work. This nightmare in Nietzsche's eyes was the multiple upon multiple of millennia of preaching good sleep, never have bad sleep, don't go after midnight, have the good inside, never treat the bad and evil how you would treat the good. And the instincts were induced to a poison that quote put them to sleep. The instincts in this nightmare of regurgitating one person's philosophy to the next generation, and then that next generation's philosopher regurgitating the same thing but in his style, but continuing that horizontal and linear self-knowledge propaganda. So it'd be time to overcome. And I'm grabbing this idea of overcoming from the realm of ideas to reality. It's time for every individual to overcome, well, first face a resistance, process, resolve, and release that resistance from you and overcome it. And you'll realize the sheer joy and cheerfulness after overcoming a resistance or fear in your life. And to Nietzsche, again, we're in Europe or in the modernity mentality to breathe again. Breathing again. Breathing again. Breathing again. Breathing again. He'll say it over and over, but with another word. Spirit. Or phrase. Or idea. Free spirits. And spirit is etymologically to breathe or breathe. So when the mentality of his time now breathes or spiriting again after this nightmare. And this is the negative portion of Nietzsche's philosophy. The affirmation of life was in Zarathustra, but after Zarathustra, he'll say in Ecce Homo, his autobiography, the negative portion of everything that was joyous and affirmative in Zarathustra. And a healthier sleep. Which ties to what I said earlier of the health of sleep. As said previously, it's a neglected topic of Nietzsche, sleep. Why is it neglected? It's because sleep to Nietzsche is an influence from the discipline of the hours of somebody's wakefulness. Once they're conscious, moving around, to say. And if they're not drowsy or exhausted or lethargic or something, that wants to become wakeful in the hours that will influence the great sleep in the after hours. The after hours meaning once you've retired from the day till the next day and you're refreshed or rejuvenated from yesterday's war, a prosperous and necessary war, not a unnecessary and degrading war. We, whose task is wakefulness itself, have inherited all the strength which has been cultivated by the struggle against this error. As I said earlier, the discipline of the wakeful hours. In this context, it's the persistent strength and the strength in one's strong mentality or their willpower to overcome this error. And he's writing for a handful and minor percentage of people. He writes for everybody and nobody. Hence the subtitle of Thus Spoke Zarathustra, a book for everyone and no one. That has become my philosophy too. Mine is for everybody and nobody. To be sure to speak of spirit and the good as Plato did meant standing truth on her head and denying perspective itself, the basic condition of all life. Spirit and good, Plato, perspective, head, and truth, in one sentence again, where the philosopher is obsessed, dispassionately, objectively, solemnly, or seriously, coldly, sometimes moderately, with truth. And he hasn't cultivated the sense of the instincts and passions for the conditions of life, because they are denying their perspective and say they have the truth as a source of power. But nature is not a mechanism where if you receive truth, you're not granted the power as nature would see, but to a degree, truth is a source of power. And by standing truth on her head and denying your perspective, you're reversing life's function. And while denying your perspective, psychology, the envy of reality as the condition of every life, or he would say the will of everything, by standing her on her head, denying yourself, you're continuing the dogma of the world. And as Plato does, first with Socrates, and he mentions here, did the wicked Socrates corrupt him after all? Could Socrates have been a corrupter of youth after all? Did he deserve his hemlock? I say, well, yes. He was bound for the hemlock itself. Great water, fresh water. And he includes physician with the question with the physician. And he with nuance and abnormally, sometimes hysterically with me. I think it's hysterical that he'll include a physician as, all right, since you like to be cunning, love to go for truth and deny everything outside of yourself, but study your body and compare your knowledge of your mind to the abilities of your body. And he's saying the question from the fundamental condition of life to the physician: could this melody attack of the loveliest product of antiquity, Plato, been corrupted from the wicked Socrates, the teacher, thus beginning this millennia of attacks, of edifices, dogma, fear inspiring to everybody? And while Nietzsche is ironic, sarcastic, and metaphorical at times, that there's blunt truth and realism in his metaphors every single time, if you read between the lines. But the struggle against Plato, or to express it more plainly, against the people, against Christianity itself for millennia, for Christianity is Platonism for the people. People quote that Christianity is Platonism for the people. Platonism is a complex philosophy itself, with the realm of ideas, it's his metaphysics, with his ethics slash morals, with compassion, the justice, pity, the good, ties with the realm of ideas, and that this good is the source of knowledge, experience, a transcendent self, etc., etc. No, the monad, that everything underneath the realm of ideas, art, theater, philosophy, or in the Greeks thought that philosophy was a luxuriant item including reason. It was not solely an item, but a luxuriant tool to have. And now philosophy and reason is for the people. With Nietzsche, this Christian ecclesiastical pressure, or Christianity, is a simplified and diluted version of Platonism, with the pure spirit and good in itself, which was rejuvenated with Kant, with his thing in itself and categorical imperative, where objectifying beauty to the impersonal is a source of good. Emphasis on good, which created a magnificent tension, which continues to today, of this spirit. And if you're puzzled of why he's saying a tension, he disagrees, and including a majority of his work, he adamantly disagrees with free will and tying it to Socrates, who influenced Plato, and etc., etc., and Plato influenced his diluted form of philosophy in Christianity, with the pure spirit, good in itself, realm of ideas, etc., etc., and excluding his his translated name to broad stature or shoulder, which today nobody that I've seen in Christianity or religion with their broad, wide stature. And the tension he's discussing is the will inside life, and that everything outside of there's nothing outside of this will, or he'll say will to power, his notorious idea, or not solely idea, hit this notorious reality of life, the condition to life, that nothing's outside the game. If so, everything ceases, it's static, it's fixed, as would be Plato's being, or his critique of the being. And once a simplified, diluted version of Platonism happened from the Catholics and Protestants and Orthodox, it became the philosophy or the religion for the people, Christianity. Blatantly, I'm excluding something. Yes, and with this tension, he discusses a bow. The bow the bow and arrow with Nietzsche is the tension determines the strength of the person's mentality, and the bow is the ambition. No, the arrow is the ambition to shoot the target at. The target being the individual's goal, which can now shoot for the most distant targets, as I said. But before that, this tension of said spirit has never existed before on Earth. It once was alleviated with the Renaissance and briefly with Napoleon, Romanticism, and it's slowly rejuvenated and resurrected with the scientific revolution, Enlightenment, Industrial Revolution, Kant, Hegel, etc., etc. And that the European man, or we translate that to the man of today, or what is man, is he posited in every work, what is man? They feel this tension as a stage of distress, to be sure, and there have already been two grand attempts to relax the bow, as I said, to relax or ease the tension of the bow. One with Jesuitism or Judea Christianity, and the second time with democratic enlightenment. He's saying democratic enlightenment in the form of fraternity, liberty, equality, etc., etc., which that evolved to the French Revolution. Nietzsche agrees with the social catharsis of war, expressing the instincts and the passions that are blocked and stopped with the laws, regulations of society. But this revolution prompted the idea of equality, liberty, fraternity, etc., etc., which is anti life, life denying, and the slowing and suffocating of the will inside, or the power and will inside of a person, or will to power inside of mass number of people. That's why he said a democratic enlightenment and not the enlightenment, which the latter may in fact, with the aid of freedom of the press and reading of newspapers, achieve a state of affairs in which the spirit would no longer so easily feel the need to be a need. The press and newspapers propagate everything. With this propaganda and the freedom of, the emphasis of freedom, depending on the region of or county of this press being, maybe it's the federal, press or state press, domestic press, or a countryside press. It's still generating and regurgitating that dogma he's been saying this whole preface. This form of grotesque imagery, now it's being dispersed not from the mouths but on material with this press, that this vomit is spewed on the papers and everybody reads these papers, and this state of affairs in which the spirit inside of people is, to say, no longer needed. Because why did they need it in the first place? I don't know. Why was it needed? So they disposed, rid, and got rid of. And how Germans invented the gunpowder, he mutually respects them on that, but they even the score again with the press. Individuals competing for one another, and they're devouring their species verbally or physically with with the unnecessary violence and pain for an ideal happiness, morality, and man in life, and that their stomachs are overflowing with, metaphorically, overflowing with these devoured people, and that they're competing for a throne. They climb, trample, and compete one another for this throne of filth, or that there's filth on the throne. Which one is which, or both? And that they continue propagating, advertising, and souring the spirit with this vomit on the newspapers that people blindly read don't don't read between the black and white ink and agenda this is aiming. It will slowly become it'll become a question in Beyond Good and Evil. Whose morality is this aiming at? Is the question of today. Whose morality is this aiming at? And he continues adamantly and confidently, saying that we are neither these Jesuits nor Democrats. We're now really Germans. We good Europeans, or noble people, free, very free spirits. There's the word I was saying earlier, of breathing again after this nightmare, this torment of this morality that's conquered for millennia as the minds has weakened these people to laziness, but are quick to see what's out of line, to say in air quotes, what's out of line and out of shape, and time to whip it back up into shape. We have it still, the whole need of a spirit, and the whole tension of its bow, and perhaps also the arrow, the task, and who knows, the target. We already said everything. Now to Aphorism 1. Oh, that preface was great. When reading the genealogy, not the genealogy, when reading genealogy and morals and Beyond Good and Evil, or Nietzsche period, just read the preface of every work of his, including Zarathustra. Now, the will to truth. There's interpretation on interpretation of the will to truth. And he's saying this truth, or will to truth, is tempting. It's intriguing. But at the same time, it has a lethal, or, to quote him, too many a haphazardous enterprise. It's a lethal prize and fate to commit with. But at the same time, it's a source of power. But dispassionately, objectively, and absolutely seeking this power or this truth. And he's saying that they celebrated with veracity, of which this has been spoken with reverence, and these questions that it has set before it. He, and including the people, including everybody who can read somebody's physiology and psychology from their voice and first appearance and impression of these slight signs of envy, jealous, vengeance, prejudice, cold, seriousness, and then with this, and how he's placing the question mark of these people, he's including their obsession with this truth. And why is it named the will to truth? It involves it involves him adopting the will from Schopenhauer, but cleansing and polishing what Schopenhauer would say of the will, and saying that the will is life, not will to life, but will to power. And the power is this primary source. Primary source that is the origin of everything in life. And it stops the Platonic Christian tradition or religious traditions of a after and before life. But with this will, it's a collection of impulses in the mind and outside of the mind that affect everything, but it's not the cause of the action, it's involved in the action itself. So this will is involved in the action of seeking the truth. Objective, absolute truth in Nietzsche's mind. And he's saying, what strange, wicked, questionable questions. It has a long story. Yes, it's a continuous examined origin story of where did it begin? Why has it wandered to grow distrustful and use our patience that slowly become impatient of this truth. Like, where is it? Or Batman would say, where is he? Just grabbing Joker in the Dark Knight scene, in the interrogation scene, the Dark Knight. It's the same with Nietzsche. He's interrogating these philosophers, saying, where is he? Where are they? And the philosophers aren't saying nothing. They're just regurgitating what they've been taught and impressed for multiple upon multiple years. It's unconscious to them, but they're not consciously deceiving people. It's a personal aim, an objective from the passions, thoughts, ideas, etc., and maxims that they created or used from time before, and reinterpret them and repolish them to how it suits their agenda to use on people. So it's an altruistic, it's a unconsciously valued virtue, altruism, but they use it in the situation and context of a desire for power, a weak desire for power. And that this Sphinx should teach us to ask two questions. Who really is it that here questions us? What really is in us that wants the truth? And I said earlier, I guess now it's implying that, oh man, you really have been reading this way too much. You can tell what he's about to say and everything. Well, yes and no, depending my mentality that day, and what Nietzsche is saying, depending on his day that he wrote some of these aphorisms. But it's true. And the Sphinx, should the Sphinx teach us to question and say riddles to others, including these philosophers who question life for the desire of truth? And is it inherent or innate in humans to quote unquote want the truth? As he was said, is it in us that wants the truth? And it's been a long time before the question of the origin of this will, until finally it came to a complete halt before an even more fundamental question. And that other question is, why not untruth? Why not some uncertainty or ignorance? And this is a minor. It will slowly become it'll become a major attack on Hegel's absolute truth. What if your truth is untruth, or your justice something unjust? Is it measured incorrect? Is your assumption off? Something a continual theme in Nietzsche's work. Now he says, the problem of value of truth step before us, or is it we that step before this problem? And it's the ability, the precious ability of humans to create and annihilate. People associate that ability to gods, demigods, something beyond physics and comprehension of a human mind. In reality, we possess the ability to create and not create. So now we introduce a value of this truth, or an issue of this value in front of us, and now we step before this issue, attempting to resolve, process, and release from us to other people, because it's overwhelming inside of us, and we desire to teach other people this truth that we have found or invented or something. While at the same time imprisoned, imprisoned dispassionately, mentally, emotionally, sometimes physically, to this truth. And while imprisoned, we're deceiving ourselves, saying, yeah, this is what the true joy and happiness is. I know I'm going through the process. This is what Kant, what Hegel, what Plato, Descartes, Leipzig, and Spinoza was saying. This grammatical and mathematical seduction is really, really working. But at the same time, who's Oedipus and the Sphinx here? Oedipus was granted the opportunity or the task to stop murder and seize this tyrant reign of the Sphinx of a Greek city. I don't remember the name now. And he did. Nietzsche is positing the question of the situation of the philosopher and truth, of which one is the Sphinx, which one is Oedipus, and he's correlating this too with man and with his will. Are you conquering yourself, or is this will, this obsessive material or immaterial ideal and metaphysical will conquering you? Who's releasing who from prison, and who's imprisoning who? It's the, and It's a rendezvous of question with question marks. And then he concludes with saying, "Would you believe it? It has finally almost come to seem to us that this problem has never been posited before, that we've been the first to see it, to fix our eye on it, to hazard it. For there is a hazard in it, and perhaps there exists no greater hazard." He's the first individual in the modern day since Socrates to realize a hazard among individuals. Yes, I'm correlating Nietzsche with Socrates, but Nietzsche disassociates with Socrates 99% of the time. 1% he's associated with Socrates is questioning of these values, these noble, high prided, and joyous people with their mathematics, ideas, knowledge, justice, and their form of good and truth. Socrates was questioning the Athenians at the time. The noble Athenians would have, "What about your ideas? Will they actually work?" And due to the weak mentality of this masculine, strong, vigorous empire of Athens, Socrates capitalized, and Greece accepted this luxuriant philosophy, reason, morality, and idealism to their culture, which continues post-Socratically. And then now it's Nietzsche with the 180 style of siding and agreeing with the nobles and disagreeing with Socrates. And realizing a hazard that continues till today, and now it's transferred to technology, a present form of nihilism. Of his time, the present form of nihilism was equality, and that equality continues to today. Equal rights, why not equal economies? Or equal free speech. That includes the freedom of press and newspaper, but you're competing, devouring, and reacting to one another on the basis of what freedom is, including with your intelligible, or the word that we use today, exposition of intellectualizing statements, language, ideas, morals, systems, etc., etc. Adding multiple layers to adding multiple layers to your selfish, appetizing, and deceptive, cunning, etc., etc., true nature to affect everybody, to inflict and affect everybody with pain, with this imaginative and psychological plane that continues today, that preceded everybody before Nietzsche. He realized that this continuing of inflicting of pain was a result of this imaginative, sublime edifices that that nobody questioned till the Enlightenment, but they questioned the existence of a deity of the Christian God. And while questioning the Christian God, they were dependent on reason, science, evidence as true evidence. And that from this they received a impersonal joy. And that translated to, oh, now reason, justice is this joy. Yes, I'm saying everything again because it's crucial to say everything again and again so that it becomes concrete in your head. That's how repetition works. Say when you work out, it's repetition of this set of weights that you're moving with tension, time, and the willpower, etc., etc. So that's the first episode of today. I will upload another episode next week with Aphorism 2 and 3. If there's questions, leave in the comments. If you would love to add to what I said, or have question of what I said, leave in the comments. And remember, Amor Fati, love your fate.